Mama's grocery sits on a spray of gravel by the side of the road, and if you pass it today, it looks every one of its 92 years. It is certainly a local institution, but not exactly a beloved one, at least not anymore. There just isn't a lot of business on this side of the river, and most people do their shopping at the bigger stores over in town. The grocery had been opened for a different time, before the bridge and the highway, and by all accounts it should have been closed for many years already. But some things are more stubborn than obviousness allows for. And if there's a proprietor who's willing to creak across the porch and unlock the door each morning, well, then you have a little store. And so it still is, even with its very poor sales, open for business, even to this day. It catches passers through looky-loos and locals short on gas with a wheezing occasionality. There is something a bit arresting about it, especially to people driving by from the cities. A simple clapboard building with a wide front porch, paint peeled off most everything, but the wooden sign still reading grocery faintly in red. There's a passing resemblance to other buildings which tourists may call charming and quaint. The creepers have been growing over it for a fair few years, and an ancient vending machine has rusted to eternal stillness outside. The heavy wooden door is scuffed and smooched with greasy palm prints. Without a window, a bell tinkles weakly, its voice dulled by rust when it is pushed open. The merchandise inside is diverse but not exactly enticing. On one of the dusty shelves, a perusing customer may find a display package of ancient spangled barrettes, askew and somehow at sea, under which are 6 neatly lined but faded boxes of baking soda and an orphaned container of frosting. There's a bit of a dizzying variety, but only a few packages of each product somewhat haphazardly arrayed, with a few notable exceptions. Next to the old register, there are 3 brightly colored shelves teeming with candy, potato chips, and donuts. These, combined with the tobacco products behind the counter, account for the majority of modern sales. Some local people do recall a time when this was a welcoming little haunt run by a big, boisterous woman named Gertrude, though everybody called her Mama. This memory had reached the critical moment where most who held it had died. Soon there wouldn't be anyone who remembered what the story used to be like. It wasn't important enough to commit to history. But here and there are a few legends of the long counter there, once bearing a soda fountain, where current grandchildren were once potentiated. One half-remembered story runs that the strange, squirrely little woman who runs the store these days was Gertrude's adopted kid. And that tale survived, because it satisfied a curiosity still very much alive and well in local circles. And that story is true, in the only way that counts. Mama's grocery had been opened in an answer to a boom in the valley. Many large parcels of wild land had been sliced up and sold off as family farms, and a comfortable society had grown up amongst the newcomers. It was a sort of eager culture that springs into being when many young families come together in a new and undetermined place. One of them had an industrious and easily bored wife who mothered her children intensely, yet found her indomitable energies unsatisfied by the processes of house and home. She insisted on, and was given, the slice of their property near the road line, and there her soul set itself to manifest. Her establishment was, at first, a happy hive made up of equal measures indolence and activity. It was impossible during this time to enter her store and to find Gertrude at rest. There was almost always a baby behind the counter, pencils in her pinned-up hair, and crass words flying out of her full, mobile mouth. She sold dry goods and seed, took telegrams and kept catalogs, and had no competition on her side of the river. She knew every scrap of gossip there was, but kept it all to herself. A line of chairs slowly accumulated on her front porch, carried there on various afternoons by regulars reluctant to leave. It became expected that If you went to Mama's, you could find a few old folks and lonely men sitting on the grocery porch, all day sometimes, smoking and strumming and chatting until Mama shooed them away after sunset. There was no need for her to put so much of her soul into the place. After all, she had a natural talent for her chosen vocation. Gertrude had the sort of simple, uneducated intuition for business that sensed the wind and sways in it, sensitive to the needs and wishes of her well-known customers before they were themselves. No sooner had a future wish been detected than her quick hand was marking new columns in a catalog, picking up the telephone to place an order. And though her place was out of the way, you could find most anything at Mama's. She had the heart-sworn loyalty of everyone in her patch of country. Gertrude either did not or would not acknowledge this fact and worked like she was at risk of losing every customer. Under her appraising eye, the fortunes of her little family swelled up to comfort, although her husband drank himself to death at the goodly age of 43. Behind the counter of Mama's grocery, there still march a series of photographs from those days, though some are flaked and badly damaged. In them, Gertrude Sawyer smiles out from a fluctuating corona of children and grandchildren who grow up and disappear from picture to picture until, in the last of them, when she's very old and very small, she sits nearly all alone. In this last photo of Gertrude, next to her is a squat, stocky woman with an uncomfortable-seeming pose, her hand clasped protectively over Mama's, and this is Kat. Kat was not her real name, but it was the only one that she had. It was the type of nickname given with a loving tease, unaware of its own cruelty, but an apt one all the same. She had hung around the store like a cat, and like many of the other children who lived within walking distance. But she was not very like the other children. First of all, she did not speak, and secondly, the other children did not associate with her. Besides this, she was an oily little thing, ill-kempt and unwashed, her clothes mismatched and outsized. She stood out from the others, and she looked sad. And so Mama, older then, with no children at home, exercised her natural empathy upon the child who never had any money to buy the candies that she petted. It started one remarkable day when the shop was swarming with children after school time. Each carried their selection to the counter with great gravity and seriousness, and the unwashed girl skulked among them, looking with hungry eyes at the prizes they carried past her one by one. Nobody called her after them out of the store, and eventually she was left alone. Gertrude clucked her tongue at the child as she mumbled to herself and pawed through the bright foil packages near the register. The child's dark, feral eyes swam up into the matriarch's face, awaiting the signal to run or hide away. But Gertrude smiled down at her, pityingly, and asked her which she'd take if she could have her very favorite thing to eat. To Gertrude, this was as natural as breathing itself, but to the child it answered a hunger which had been left to crave in her for far too long, and had become a black pit at the bottom of her stomach. It was an appetite that she had not been aware of, that had become small and hardened, but one that reared up and begged for relief at the first taste of the kindness that could slake it. She devoted herself immediately and eternally to Gertrude. The child's fidelity was intense and concerning. Over the course of a summer, it became impossible to coax her out of the door of the store at night, and she began to follow Mama around like a shadow. Gertrude tried to speak to her continuously, asking her questions, chiding her gently, telling her stories of her own children who had grown up and moved away. One day she was in the middle of such an anecdote and sweeping the floor with her slowed, arthritic pace, and she turned and started to see the silent girl behind her. "Please," said Kat, and extended her hand out to take the broom. Mama smiled and gave it to her and settled down to finish her story. The two came to develop an association of mutual need and strange coincidence. A bridge was built between the farmlands of the valley and Greentown, bringing the convenience of society to their side of the river. This had carved a gouge into business no sooner than Gertrude had begun to grow old. As the shoppers grew less frequent, and the old-timers who sat on the porch died away, still the shop was opened every morning. The two women could be found behind the counter together, the one speaking slowly but melodically, the other listening attentively and performing the chores of the store with a grateful tenderness. The hectic cheerfulness of the early days was replaced with a comfortable serenity and a predictable pattern of faithful customers. A strange sort of fate seemed to have drawn the two of them together like this, an unintentional perfection of timing. It recurred over and over throughout their shared years. The very same morning that Gertrude sat over her coffee in her empty kitchen and lamented the silence of her once full home, that same morning she found Kat's sleeping place carved into the brambles and brush behind her store. This was the only point where their arrangement ever became spoken. Mama asked her if she'd like to come stay in the big farmhouse. She told her it was too empty and that she felt lonely in the long, dry mornings there herself. Kat softly assented, and so occurred a second age of happiness at Mama's grocery, a reflection and resonance of the first, where many stories and memories were passed by one, and a deep love nourished by the other. Then Mama had died. Mama had died, and Kat had been alone in the shop for a few days, confused and disoriented. She didn't seem to know that there would be a funeral, and nobody thought to inform her of it, so at a loss of what to do next, she continued to open the store each morning and close it up each night. But everyone knew that Mama Gertrude had died, attended the funeral, and avoided the store. There were no customers. For the better half of a week, Kat sat hunched and inconsolable in the silent shop, staring at the empty aisles in a miserable nightmare, as though through the sheer force of her grief she could will the return of the matriarch. Eventually, a man in a suit came and talked to her for a while. Kat looked at the counter when he spoke and jumped every time he rapped his class ring on the wood to get her attention. Didn't she know? The business was hers if she wanted it. It didn't make any money, and it took up so much time, the kids weren't going to fight her for it. The lawyer, fidgeting slightly in the already deteriorating store, asked her impatiently several times if she wanted to sign the papers or not, and didn't seem to notice that the woman understood very little of what he said. He put the pen in her hand, and numbly, Kat signed the papers. She did not know it, but she had begun the eternal task of honoring Gertrude's memory. Kat may have admired her mentor's strength and love of hard work, but she didn't share it. She hated the little store once Mama was gone. It was a sucking, crying, devouring child she had never wanted, always asking more of her than she had on hand to supply. Out of respect to Mama, she administered to its needs, patched the leaks, sat on the phone placing orders with the mocking-voiced representatives, and waited. She was not quite sure what she was waiting for. Occasionally, she caught herself sitting patiently in the kitchen of the home at night, or by the front door in the morning, and discovered in a sideways fashion that she was waiting for Mama to come back. At those dark black moments she could not see. But what else was there? In her life, she had been the recipient of a pitiful amount of kindness, and most of it had come from one hand only. Like a dog, she returned over and over to the only place she had ever once been happy, out of habit, more than anything else, but within this habit was a tiny grain of hope. After all, to return to a well, even once which is long run dry, expresses a desire for water. And Kat still had it in her to want happiness, even if she didn't achieve it. The change of management was not good for business. Although Gertrude had been geriatric for years, her bright, enterprising spirit and warm presence had been undimmed and kept the place in a steady trickle of regulars. The trouble was that Kat was not really meant to be in business. She had only really liked sitting behind the counter when Mama was there, hearing her stories when the store was empty, listening to her chatter on with her usual ease and warmth the rest of the time. When it was just her alone, people made her uncomfortable. She made people feel uncomfortable. She stared too much. She barely spoke. She rarely bathed. And so the grocery came into the sort of state that we see it in today, once Kat herself had begun to grow old, unhappily, not really knowing what else it was that she ought to do. She had a particular dislike for the children who came into the store. She felt that she profaned it with their filthy little hands and their loud mouths. She was positive that there were a few of them that whispered about her, a waspish girl with yellow hair and a boy with a blunt, lopsided face. She hated these especially. And she had to watch them sharply for shoplifting. She used to not know what to say when she caught their little hands fishing into their pockets, but over the years she'd had their practice, and so she crowed out when the little blunt-faced boy furtively slipped a chocolate bar out of sight. He jumped and hooted, and like a flock of birds, the children slammed and scampered out of the store. Kat glowered into the dimness of the interior, which had been steadily deteriorating since Gertrude's healthy years. The better part of a century now. She had no conception of her role as a local boogeyman, or that the children she'd spooked off would taunt the boy of his impending doom. She'd appear in his mirror that night, they told him, lean through and gobble him up, they lilted, for she was a mean old witch. The sounds of their sing-song chant was barely audible inside as they skipped and hollered away. The door swung open again to admit another customer, a youngish woman with her head slung downwards. Kat lapsed into a dissatisfied labor with her inventory sheet as the sound of footsteps creaked gently through the aisles. Finally, they approached the counter. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Kat raised her beetled eyes to the woman who skulked near. It was only the two of them in the store, but she looked timid and overwhelmed. "I was wondering if you have, The girl trailed off and stared helplessly at Kat, who returned her expectant silence. She had big eyes and dark hair and a reedy voice that finally managed to speak. Can you help me?" "What?" Kat's voice, underused and never honed, has a croaking, unpleasant abruptness. The girl stiffened and her face went red. Oh my God, I need some things and I don't have any money. Please? She reached forward, and in her trembling hands there were 2 cans of tuna fish and a roll of crackers wrapped in plastic. Her fingers were clenched and plumped with a thin sheen of sweat. It seemed obvious that some great force of will had been mustered to make this request. Kat hesitated, her usual refusal held back somewhere by something that she apprehended only partially. "Yes," she said, and her face showed her own surprise. The girl's swollen expression broke into a queasy smile. Thank you. I really am so grateful. Thank you. I really thank you. It's been a hard few weeks for us. I knew you weren't. She stopped herself before she said what she meant. I mean, I knew you were kind. I never thought I would need to ask for something like that. It seemed like as she said the words, they hit her in their full intensity for the first time. Her grateful expression wavered, her emotional eyes flinching in the face of some horrible realization. She tried to start speaking again, maybe to calm herself. And the wave she fought bowled her over and she burst into tears. The 2 cans of tuna fell to the ground as her hands flew, embarrassed to cover her face, which had broken into a swollen redness of exhaustion and defeat. It was clear that she did not wish to weep, but that the impulse had come over her and refused to be smothered. In something like shock, a sob broke from her throat, her hands continuing to flutter ineffectually around her face in a futile attempt to stop it all from happening. There was an older woman that moved from behind the counter to take the younger one in her arms to blunt the edge of the world's cruelty from slicing her open. With a distant shock, Kat realized that it was her, and that some strange impulse had overtaken her to comfort the girl. She did not know how to do this well. Her rough body moved with an awkward, hunched attention to stroke the back which shook with sobs and to smooth the hair away from her forehead. Wet eyes slipped with wounded pride and humiliated thankfulness to meet hers once the sobs had passed. Something much more important than charity had passed between the 2 women in the store, and neither of them spoke for a moment. You know, the girl said, her voice thickened with tears but upturned into a watery smile. You know, I've been coming in here since I was a little girl, and I don't even know your name. What? What? I've probably seen you 100 times. I can't believe I've never asked you. What's your name? Kat stared at her with more surprise than she'd felt when the girl had burst out crying. Was it possible? Yes. She did know her. Knew that she had seen her 100 times also, and yet had never ascribed any reality to this fact whatsoever. She had seen this young woman grow from a child at intervals, and had dismissed it utterly. The way the girl was speaking made all of this seem strange to Kat for the very first time. It seemed obvious to her that those who came into her store interacted with her as some sort of resented automaton, forgetting her completely once they left. She did not have the charisma or the charm of her predecessor, had never pretended to. Her only goal was to open up the store and close it each evening, and to weather the hours which were suspended in between. It was entirely surprising to her that any memory of her presence existed outside of the store itself, or that there was a place in the minds of other people where her name ought to be written down. The thought was somehow humiliating, but that was not all it was. Kat, she answered, giving the name that Mama Gertrude had given her here, many years ago. Not the first name that she had been given, but the first real one. My name is Kat. Mine's Rita, the girl said, smiling through her tears. And I really do want to say thank you. I'm sorry I fell apart on you like that. You really are a kind person, you know? She gathered up the goods that she'd selected and held them in her hands as she hesitated again and smiled, and then made for the door. Right before she passed through it, Kat had found the words to speak again. "Thank you, too, Rita," she said, and the girl smiled quizzically, not sure what exactly it was that she meant.